Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined here by our publisher, Ronnie Sanders, and former Auburn AD Jay Jacobs here, who joins us every other week on the podcast. Jay, as we were talking before we got rolling, it's getting into the depths of the offseason for sure, with spring games in the rearview mirror, basketball in the rearview mirror. How have you been doing, and what are some of the things you've been focusing on and up to this late spring?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you, and enjoying baseball and softball right now, and the women's golf team is competing right now out in Arizona. So lot's happening around sports, but doing some executive coaching. I'm in Spartanburg, South Carolina today. I did some servant leadership training today with a business up here, and getting a chance to visit some family. So everything's going great. And just looking forward to the summer, then, like everybody else, anticipating the fall, and how good are we going to be, and how good's everybody else going to be, and just exciting times.
How do you feel like? I know we're going to talk about some other things, but how do you feel like Auburn is looking? It's been 4 straight losing seasons now for the football program. So how do you feel like the trajectory is going?
I think that I'm not in it day to day. Probably not near as much as, not even close to what you two guys are, but I like everything that I'm reading about, the guys they have coming on, the guys that they've signed, and the guys that have gotten out of the transfer portal. I had a chance for the first time to hear Hugh Freeze this past week at a leadership conference. And, he and I have known each other for a long time because I was AD and he was at Ole Miss, and there's some camaraderie there amongst SEC foes, and but I tell you, he's doing the right thing at Auburn as far as the values and the culture and the character guys. He has to win. He knows that, but I really appreciate the way that he's approaching the job and doing the things at Auburn. So we'll just see. It's just so different now. 16 teams in this league, and it's hard. It's a hard league, but it's a great league. It's the best league in the nation. But I'm really excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm anticipating it, and I know we all are.
We talked a little bit before we came on about the process of hiring coaches. To me, Freeze is a lot better fit than the last guy. Talk about the process of going through. I mean, you were involved in a number of hires. Chizik obviously was controversial and then wins a national championship. How do you go through that process, and how do you determine, how important is fit, I guess is the first part of my question.
Well, fit, people say it a lot as a cliche, but goodness, it is so important. The fit is, you can be, maybe not quite as good as X's and O's, but be a good fit at a place, and you can be there a long time. If you can, if the community can endear you, the fans can endear you, and more important than anything else, if the players trust you. Now, there's there are 21 sports at Auburn, and but the ones that dominate most of the conversation are football, men's basketball, and baseball. That doesn't mean that the softball hire, the tennis hire for women, or the volleyball hire doesn't mean that those are any less important. It's just those aren't near as public as others are. So when you ask me about that, I think about those high-profile hires. Okay, guys. So it's really hard to do because the fan base, as they should, they think that anybody you talk to wants to come to Auburn. Or if you're at the University of Florida, anybody wants to come to Florida or wherever it may be. But that's just not the case. And so managing expectations of fans, but finding the right fit. You mentioned Gene Chizik. Man, he had a chance. We worked with him at Auburn and went undefeated, in 2004. And then he goes to Texas as a defensive coordinator. He was defensive coordinator at Auburn, as everybody will remember. And then goes to Texas and is undefeated, wins the national championship. And if we had hired him then, it probably wouldn't have been any controversy at all. But I remember in the interview process when we were talking to him, he was asked, how are you going to explain, you're undefeated, now you're 5-19. And he said, I'm a far better coach, having been a head coach, than I would have been if you had hired me straight out as a defensive coordinator. And that certainly didn't end the way we wanted it to, but there's a lot of factors there. But we won a national championship, and if he's not here, we don't win that. And the fit for him was because he had been here before. He knew what Auburn was all about. He's a guy that's honest and integrity, and he just thinks about ball. He's a ball playing, he's a ball coach, and he cares about his players. That was a great fit for us, even though it was controversial. The interesting thing about it is that the popular people, the popular coaches that the fans wanted, ended up only coaching a year or two wherever they ended up and got fired, even though there were some really good people. But it's a challenging thing. So, what you want to do is you have to gather as much information as you possibly can. I mean, and you oftentimes want to talk to people that you wouldn't think you would talk to. Like, I enjoy talking to the head trainers of a current coach and the academic counselors, because they can tell you where somebody's value is. So a lot of dynamics there. Happy to answer, try to talk about any other questions, but it's a challenging thing to do. And, we've got 16 teams in this league, and the three major sports, I think that's 42. And I think we've only got 4 ADs in this league now that have hired a coach and won a national championship in one of those three sports. I mean, so 10% of them have won national championships. The other 90 have not. It's just awful hard to do. And I may be off one or two on my math, but I don't think I am. But it's challenging to do, and as competitive as this league is. So to answer your question again, fit is as important as anything else. But you have to have those tangibles, being able to win games, and intangibles. And Auburn, the creed requires that.
Jay, when you were at Auburn, I feel like we talked about Hugh Freeze a little bit, going into year 3, there's people with, a little bit of heightened expectations for him. And I think that's completely valid, for what they need to accomplish on the field this season. But when you're in the AD chair, how much do you what's the fine line between communicating that and trying to steer away from pressure? Because obviously, any human being, you kind of get put under that pressure. It may make things a little bit more difficult. What's that like when it gets to a point where push comes to shove and it's like, all right, let's get some results here on the field. Feel like we've given you long enough, because that's kind of what it feels like with Freeze this year. What's that kind of balance between talking about it too much and obviously you don't want to be too distant and just kind of let it play out?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because what I learned the hard way. Okay. So what I started doing wasn't what I started doing at first, okay? So Dr. Gouge, Dr. Richardson hired me, and then Dr. Gouge came in, and Dr. Gouge wanted to meet with each head coach at the end of the year, okay? As soon as the season was over, every head coach would meet with Dr. Gouge. And I learned from that's where you set expectations for the next year. You can't do that hypothetically in football. You can't do that in August or September. I can't be working with a head football coach and all of a sudden, we're 0-2 or 1-1 in September, walk in the door and start talking about expectations. I don't want to surprise anybody. And, one thing that I often say is that I didn't fire anybody. Everybody that no longer worked for me, they fired themselves, because they didn't meet the expectation. So what I learned to do over time was that as soon as the season's over, sit down with the head coaches and tell me where you think we're going to be. And I will tell you where I think we need to be. And let me tell you something, guys, there's no disconnect there. Everybody knows, after you've been at a place for a year or two, every head coach knows what's expected of him or her, okay? Because the competition is doing these things, and that's what you have to do, okay? So we would sit out at the end of the year, and then throughout the year, the spring and the summer, we would talk about those things. Now, the thing that you have to always, consider is, what are some things outside the head coach's control that may have contributed to a loss or a bad season or something going awry. You just have to think about those things. That doesn't mean that you change the course or expectations. You just have to take those into consideration. And so, the thing that I learned in 2013 was the impact. I didn't learn this till a year later. It was the impact, those shootings had on our student athletes in June of 2012. It really impacted our student athletes. But I don't really want to get into all that. But a lot of things can sometimes be very fragile, and the public or even people close to it sometimes don't understand that until you get a little bit away from it. But to answer your question, is that I'm not sneaking up on anybody. I'm not going to wake up one day and walk in and say you got to win 50 baseball games. We're going to set those things early, just like I want somebody to do for me, just like you would expect from somebody else. Don't surprise me. No surprises.
You said a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me. We had the same situation at Florida when I was there. We had some players. We ended up banning them from going to that. I think they were already banned and went over there anyway to that bar. Had some guys get in trouble over there. And then, you said something about Chizik saying that, how do you explain 5 and 19? And he said, I'm a better coach having been a head coach. And we had that issue at Florida. Ron Zook, I think, was a better head coach at Illinois than he was at Florida, simply because he had been a head coach.
Right.
And so it's easier to have those growing pains, I think, at a Southern Miss or an Arkansas State versus, you walk in and replace Steve Spurrier. It's a different animal.
Right. There's no doubt about it. And, you just never know how things are going to turn out. You just want to hire good people. Whatever business you're in, you want to hire good people, have good values. And, at Auburn, the creed just sets a great standard for everybody. And that's what we tried to do. We always tried to hire people that could honor the creed. Now, sometimes that wasn't the case, or, even at different schools, you'll see where a guy was really successful at one place and comes to another and he's not as successful. Just a lot of dynamics involved, and it's really hard. That's why, as I mentioned, that's why it's hard to hire coaches who win national championships, particularly in this league. It's just a tall task. But hey, you know what? That's what you signed up for. So as athletics director, you better be looking for people who can win championships, and that's what we're trying to do every day. Was who can win a championship. So, but yeah, those things do matter. Experience does matter.
How difficult is it? You talked about going out and trying to hire coaches. Not everybody wants to come. I know, but explain to the audience how big buyouts are. How big a hurdle is that? A guy might want to come, but if you've got a huge buyout, you're not only paying that, you're paying the guy's taxes on it, and you're grossing it up. And so, explain a little. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's particularly today's buyouts. So people understand, most coaches, I'm not sure that 100% of the Power Four, I would suspect everybody that's a head football, basketball, or baseball coach in the Power Four have a buyout. What that means is they have a contract with their school, and if they want to leave or if someone wants to hire them, then the school and or the coach that wants to leave has to pay their school that money to get out of the contract. And we've seen it recently, around Auburn with trying to hire a women's basketball coach. Some people that you would normally go after had this huge buyout, and so sometimes sometimes you go ahead and you do it because that this person can make a big difference in your program, and you're willing to take that chance and know that he or she's a proven coach, so you're going to do it. But the reason there's a buyout is to discourage people from coming and getting your coach. So those are all part of the consideration because, at Auburn, there's a compensation committee of the board of trustees and there's the president. They have to approve those things. And sometimes, even though they may make sense to an athletics director or fans or both, it may not make sense to those business people, that are running your board. So, but that's a really good thing because it's checks and balances. but the buyout's a factor in everything that we do. Keeping someone and hiring someone, the buyout is a factor. The other thing is, I'll say this too, is that anybody, if we had a buyout at Auburn and a coach came to me and wanted to leave, if I could legally waive his or her buyout, I would do it, because if you don't want to be here, I don't want to hold your feet to the fire. Because if you don't want to be here, you want to be somewhere else, you're not going to be any good for Auburn. You're not going to be any good for you. So let's go ahead and go. But that never happened at Auburn with major sports, because you're a place you can compete for championships. So nobody's trying to come and get you because they know we're going to try to do everything we can to keep you.
It was interesting to me. I represented a coach that I won't call the school, but he had an opportunity at another school. I'd be interested in your take on this. He was assistant coach, and the head coach left. But his contract was, he was tied to the school, was not tied to the coach. And so he had another opportunity, but the school was holding him to the buyout. And so I asked the AD, I'm like, well, if he, does he have a job? Can you guarantee him a job? No. Well, he's got a job offer, but you can't let him out of his buyout. Right. We want the buyout money. To me, to me, it felt like they were using that to kind of make money for the athletic department. How would you navigate that as an athletic director?
Well, just only knowing what you say, what you understand is that, it's an agreement that both parties agreed to. And so if you're an assistant coach and you sign something because you want to get the benefits on the other side of it, but you don't like it when you get, you get handcuffed to a school, you shouldn't sign it. So, but I still go back to, when it comes to head coaches, if you don't want to be here, you need to go. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen at Auburn. But as far as assistant coaches go, I love the idea of tying the assistant coaches to the head coach. That if the head coach isn't there anymore, the assistant, no more contract, you're out. I like that idea better than I did the other. But schools, I can't fault them. That if the contract says that, you can leave here, but you owe me a buyout, even though the head coach is gone and your contract doesn't stipulate that, you owe the school. And that's just the way it is. The school would probably, it sounds like to me that Ronnie, that the school would rather, just pay this guy's contract out than let him go. And there's probably some reason for that you may know, but I don't know. But
he was going to have some other opportunities. Unfortunately, he's unemployed right now. But this has been a few years ago now. But we ended up working it out. The school he was going to paid half of it, and I ended up getting the other school to waive the other half. So we ended up working it out. But that was an interesting situation. I kind of felt like that. I said, can you guarantee him a job? No. But so you wanted to pay the buyout. That was an interesting.
Yeah.
I had never really encountered that. But
yeah, well, and the one thing, and you guys know this, and the listeners probably do too, is that there's a lot more goes on behind the scenes than we'll ever know. There are things that happen in the athletic department and in a program that, it's your job as AD not to let the public know. They're just supposed to love your institution and love who the head coach is, but you have to protect them from that sometimes. You have to protect them from the ugliness of it. Because it is competitive and people want to make a living, but there's probably some circumstances there that warrant exactly what that AD did, and there's probably some circumstances that warranted that assistant coach saying I shouldn't have to pay it. They're two sides, there are three sides to everything: your side, my side, and the right side. So
that's right.
It just depends on how it all works out.
Nathan,
Jay, talking about the process of making a hire. How difficult was it as, throughout your career, as the microscope kind of was enhanced with the introduction of more social media mediums, the internet becoming, what it was over the course of time? Did that make things a little bit more difficult for you guys in terms of making a hire? And I guess how difficult was it to try to block out that noise and stay in your own lane and sort of understand, like, here's what I've evaluated, here's what we think about a candidate, and try not to listen to all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. If you don't know, if you're thinking about 2 or 3 people for the job, okay, I think it's a healthy thing to hear from a reasonable part of your fan base. Because what you want is you want excitement. You want to be able to sell tickets, and more importantly, recruits are going to. Your fan base is going to be a reflection of recruits. And your players are too. So you want to hear a little bit of that. I'm thinking about John Doe, or 2 or 3 names get out there, and if one of them has a flashpoint, there's probably a reason for that. You probably want to stay away from it. So I think that what we did was my people in media relations, they would keep me abreast of that. I couldn't get all caught up in that because there's just so many varying opinions, and they're all valuable. And so many people are emotional, as we're glad they are, because it means something to them. But you have to be able to separate that out a little bit, but also be aware of it. Be aware of what's being said out there, because those are your stakeholders, your stockholders, those are your fan base. So you want to be aware of how they're feeling about it. But at the end of the day, you got to make a decision that you think is best for the institution. And sometimes that's real popular, and sometimes it's not. But you know more about it than anybody else, generally speaking, and so it's a tough spot to be in. But with social media now, it is. I know for a fact that a few years ago there was an AD in this league that was about to hire a coach, and the place erupted, and the AD ended up getting fired. And when they looked at social listening, it was only about 80 people creating this chaos. But it sounded like it was a couple of 100,000. And those things happen, so you got to be careful how much you listen or how much credit you put to that. That's why sometimes it's important to have, a good, a selection committee, so to speak, or advisors. So when we hired Gus, it was Bo Jackson, Pat Sullivan, and Matt Crawford. 3 really stable people, unemotional, but care about Auburn. And it was really helpful as we went through that interview process. And, there were people screaming about we should hire this guy and that guy. And those guys were just telling everybody, just be quiet. So that was most helpful in that situation. So you have to be attuned to it, but you can't let it consume you.
Talk a little bit about, I've always been interested in 2020, end of 2012, going into 2013, Tuberville's departure and Malzahn's hiring. Talk a little bit about that.
Departure.
I'm sorry, Chizik's departure.
Yeah.
Chizik's departure.
So what was your question? Excuse me, Nathan, I walked over here. What'd you say?
I meant Tuberville going into Chizik. Not talk a little bit about Tommy leaving and then Chizik, that hire and how that happened.
In 08?
In 08.
Yeah. So, hey, here's what's interesting. Talking about the hiring process. So we haven't even, that all went down like on a Thursday when Tommy went to the president and said, I'm done. Me and Tommy went to the president. Tommy said, I'm out. We hadn't even gone to interview anybody yet. And on Saturday morning, on ESPN, I guess it was, I don't know if it was College Game Day or the SEC Championship. Must have been the SEC Championship. They're talking about who we've already interviewed. We hadn't left campus yet. And they start talking about this one coach, and I would say his name, but I'm not going to. Just probably wouldn't be the right thing to do. About this one coach we were talking to. So I called the AD, and I told him, I said, hey, we're not talking to your guy. And he said, well, I hope not. I just gave him an extension. I said, this is all crazy because these people somewhere or another have come up with this guy's name and saying that's who we're going after. And we're not. Now, I'll tell you a second story on that. Another story is that I had an AD call me outside of our league and said, Jay, I hear you're going after my guy. And I told him, I said, hey, my friend, walk in there and tell your guy or have your guy call me. But my message is going to be, is what I would tell you to tell him, is that he's not on Auburn's radar, and he's lucky he's got a job where he is. He needs to keep that one and quit trying to, bolster his contract. So that's how sort of the weekend started. And then we went to New York and started interviewing people, interviewed some great guys. As I mentioned, there were some fan favorites in that. Unfortunately, those guys that we didn't hire, they're no longer head coaches either. But then we got a chance to talk to Gene, and we talked to him in Dallas. We flew into there and talked to him because he had just had back surgery. And Gene actually just put it all out there for us. How are we going to do this? And we just knew, having worked with him and his values and how he fed Auburn, we knew he was the right guy at the time compared to the other ones. I'll tell you one last story is that one prominent alumni called me and said, "Hey, this guy will come to Auburn." This guy, I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yes." So I called that guy. And that guy says, "I'm not coming to Auburn." And so you just, you're trying to manage that. It's a little bit challenging sometimes, but it's wonderful, because people care. So it's not, there's no complaining here. It's just a fact of the environment you're in. And it can be challenging sometimes, but you got to be up for the challenge. We all, have a big responsibility, and that's what we've signed up for. And that's what you have to do.
How many times throughout your career would you say there were instances like that where you had to talk to somebody who's saying something that was just either unsubstantiated or completely false, maybe with a certain agenda to get a raise at their school or what have you? I mean, how much of the job is kind of putting out that fire so you can move on to the actual thing that you're working on?
Hey, Nathan, it's a big part of the job, because when you hear these names and you think we can get that proven head coach to leave that institution, it's not because Auburn's not attractive. It's just because there are a lot of reasons you're there, and we spent a lot of time chasing down those type things. And I would say probably 8 times out of 10 is the agent or someone on the coach's behalf trying to enhance him where he is or his contract. So very few of those pop up to be really, all right, this guy's serious. He would actually be interested in coming here. And when we did the hire of Bruce, there was a big time men's basketball coach that wanted to come to Auburn. We chased that down, and we ended up talking to him, and he would have come. We ended up hiring Bruce, but you have to walk those things out, just like any good leader would do. You want to find out what the best available employees are.
How important is, you talk about the Auburn Creed background checks. I'm assuming you're pretty thorough when you get ready to hire guys.
Oh, it's, once we get a list of 2 or 3, we've got people calling people, doing background checks. We want to talk, we want to talk to people that's worked for this person before, this male or female head coach. We want to talk to the people. We want to talk to the trainer. How's this person in the training room? How does he or she treat you? We want to talk to the academic counselor. Obviously we want to talk to the AD or the head coach that this might be the assistant coach used to work with. And if we're taking a assistant coach and making them a head coach, you're talking to everybody, because this is, these hires they impact a lot of people, a lot of families, and your institution's brand. And so background checks are huge. Now they, in the last few years, they've become very formalized. There were some people that made a mistake and hired somebody without doing a thorough background check and got embarrassed. And you can all look up the history on that. We didn't do that at Auburn, but that has happened. And so now you actually doing a formal background check. You're getting involved with legal to look at every facet of somebody's life, speeding tickets, whatever it may be. You don't want any surprises when you walk them to that podium to introduce them as your next coach. And you don't want any surprises 1 week or a month later that something pops up. So you have to be very thorough. And sometimes you're chasing ghosts. Sometimes you're hearing things that aren't true just because somebody thought it was true and they said something to somebody, and then, all of a sudden it takes on a life of its own. So you just have to be very thorough. But we had a great staff at Auburn that did that. They really worked hard to make sure that there wasn't anything we didn't know. And, we did that in the interview process with our prospective head coaches too. We took our time and tell us all about yourself, and it's really important. And we learned those through some lessons over time, for not doing that. So it all goes back to, do the right thing all the time.
When you get ready to hire a coach, well, I'm assuming do you have a list in your back pocket?
You do.
Always ready?
Yeah. And it's a fluid list. It's always changing because, you'll have a couple people on a list, and then you'll have an interaction with somebody, and you'll say, okay, this person needs to go from 3 to 1, and this person needs to go to number 10. You'll learn more. You learn more about people when you're not trying to hire than when you're already in that zone trying to hire. But everybody does. We all have lists. It may not be in your top drawer now. It may be on your iPad in notes, but we all have lists and always looking. When you go to SEC meetings or national meetings, you're always talking to people just casually about, this person or that person. You're just trying to keep, make sure you can make the best decision you can if you ever have to do that, make a hire.
Talking about that process, when you get to, like, all we've talked about building up to it, and then you make the hire, the 2 or 3 days after that, is that a nice feeling of relief just to be able to say you're set and done with it? Because I imagine you get maybe a few weeks or even a couple months worth of just being more so excited about the future of it before, all right, they start to recruit, they start to try to give you results. Is it sort of a relief feeling when you finally do get to the end of that process?
There is, Nathan, some relief, but really that's when the work starts then, because now you're about to hire staff, and that takes more time and energy than hiring that one position, And so when you're going through that and you're transitioning, because that means that some people are having to leave that would prefer not to leave. So you're transitioning, them out the door, and you're trying to treat them with kindness and respect, just like you would expect from anybody else, treating people the way you want to be treated. At the same time, you're going 100 miles an hour trying to help this new coach get hers or her staff on board and get rolling, because recruiting, we just lost 3 hours of recruiting at the press conference, so you got to keep moving. So there's really not a, probably as I think about your question, Nathan, probably a month or two later, once everything sort of gets set and you know who the assistants are and who the people are that are working, behind the scenes, like a Ronnie or whomever it may be, on your staff. Once you get all those settled in, then you think, okay, all right, here we go. Let's make sure the culture's right, and let's make sure that we're providing them every resource we possibly can to be successful. So that's probably for me, as I think about your question, which I never had before, that's probably for me when it hits in, when it sets in just a couple of months after.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for giving us your insight. As always, enjoyed the conversation.
I do as well. Thank you guys for having me, and to all you Auburn folks, War Eagle, and it's an exciting time. We just all got to keep pulling the rope in the same direction, and just try to be a light in this world. But thank you guys, and I'm glad everybody in y'all's family's feeling better.
Me too.
All right.
Appreciate
Y'all
it.
be blessed. God bless. War Eagle.
Okay.